I'm Alex Fraiser, farm in central South Dakota, north central South Dakota around Falkton. We're a small farm, 900 acres. And what really changed us to adapt into a more conservationist, regenerative, use whatever term you like, was we lost a bunch of ground. Went from about 2,000 acres to 900 acres in 18 months. And it was adapt or die, and so that's what we did. Luckily, my dad is very open-minded. You know, if I come up with a crazy idea, he'll at least listen, and we've implemented a lot of them. But I like to start my presentation with this picture here from one of Christine Jones's, one of her YouTube seminars, and it's the power of the polyculture. This is in Canada, and in the foreground here is triticale planted on its own, and behind it is triticale planted with an 8-way species mix. And that equated to about a 6-ton of difference in terms of forage on those acres that year. And it's a small demonstration farm similar to what this is. But that kind of thinking is what got me to what we're doing today on our farm, incorporating different species with our cash crop. And that's what we're doing. This is a little bit about me. Like I said, farm in north central South Dakota. Work as an agronomist full-time. I've done that for 10 years. I also do some contract work with a corn company testing seed in South Dakota. Work as a cover crop coach for the Farmers for Soil Health. It's a government-funded grant program, trying to incorporate covers on more and more land. We've been intercropping soybeans for the last 6 years on our farm. This is year number 6. Started in 2020. And then my idea is, as an agronomist, trying to blend the two worlds of the regenerative and the conventional side, taking pieces from both and making it bite-sized, making it something that people are willing to approach and try on their own farm, versus I think regenerative can kind of turn people off a little bit because it's all in or nothing. This is a way to blend both worlds to try and get more adaptation, more soil health practices, and it's a really simple way to do it. So what it is, this intercropping, companion cropping, nurse cropping is a better title for it than polycropping. Those are the words you're going to want to use if you're talking to an NRCS agent, if you're talking to your insurance agent. This is an approved practice through federal crop insurance, through NRCS. This is already there. It's not going to kick you out of any programs that you're doing. It might not qualify specifically for a cover crop, but it's not going to affect your ability to insure your cash crop, which is the soybeans. We're using the cover crops to try and benefit our soybean crop. We're using oats, rye, and flax. We've played around with the oats and the rye rates, but we've bumped up the rye. We're at 18 pounds an acre of that, 10 pounds of oats, 3 pounds of flax. The flax is in there from Mycorrhizal Fungi Association. It's cereal rye we're using, but planted in the spring, so it never vernalizes, which means it doesn't go to seed. So you're not going to have any rye issues carrying over if you're planting spring wheat following a soybean, or any oat, or you're not going to have that rye. That's a concern for some people. But it's really in there for the weed suppression and just early season competition and growth. And then oats, it's another thing that can improve the Mycorrhizal Fungi Association. It helps build the effect with iron, getting iron into the soybeans. You can see less iron IDC in soybeans. Again, it's another thing, different rooting zone, early season growth, just competition early in these soybeans. We're using chemicals still, and that might be the most important thing to understand in this program, is our chemical approach. Starting with a fall pre, that's something that we do religiously. Whether it's Valor or sulfentrazone, you must do something in the fall. Otherwise, you're going to have to do something right after you plant. We're in list soybeans, so, Liberty, it's too cold in the spring. 2,4-D doesn't kill kochia very well. So that's our big problem, is kochia. We've pretty much eradicated that on our farm now. But if you can get out there and put a fall pre on, and then get this planted early, plant it all at the same time, using an air seeder. So one tank's doing soybeans, one tank's doing your cover crop mix. It ends up on 15-inch rows, but it's 7.5-inch spacing. I've got guys that are doing it with 10-inch spacing air seeders. You see very similar effects. This is the problem that I'm most this is my number 1 or 2 problem right now, is how do I reduce chemical? I think we're seeing a lot of negative effects from chemical. I think we've kind of plateaued a little bit, 5, 6 years in, where we're still using quite a little chemistry. It's a lot at one time, and then a lot of times we don't have to spray again, or we have to come back with one product. But it's still something that, got 8 things in the tank right now a lot of times, and it really stunts that bean for quite a while. This year we've experimented. We took Roundup out of the tank. We took Liberty out of the tank early, using just Enlist, and actually clethodim wasn't in there until a later pass. Just trying to, not to overload that plant with too much chemical, let it grow without such a suppression. That's a big hurdle for us. I don't necessarily know how to get away from all this chemistry yet. I think you gotta experiment. And one way we're trying to experiment is adding more species to this mix to grow our weeds instead of let weeds propagate. That had some very little success this year, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Here's what it looks like. This is the cover crop blend, just in my hand as we're dumping it in the tank. You can see the oats, rye, and flax. Like I said, we did add some species this year. We added sugar beet, safflower, and golden German millet. Our biggest weeds were Canadian thistle, water hemp, and green and yellow foxtail. So we were picking species from those same plant families to try and suppress weeds. The millet and the safflower did not grow at all. The sugar beet grew really well, actually. That'll stay in the blend, but swing and a miss on adding those species. So there's always going to be a lot of experimentation and failure that is going to come with some of this stuff. You got to be willing to accept that a little bit. This is just very early. This field actually here is beans on beans from 23 and 24. It looked great in terms of growth and getting great emergence. This field ended up doing about 12 bushel worse than our rotated ground. And that obviously hurts, but it's a great demonstration field to see what this looks like in good circumstances. If you're on a small grain rotation, if you're putting beans after small grain, you're going to see really good stands. You'll see very similar growth to this. If you're on corn stalks, it's going to be a little bit different. With an air seeder and corn stalks, you just don't get this picture perfect stand. It's not something that I worry about a lot, as long as we've got 100,000 or so live plants at the end of the day. And just moving forward through the growing season. This is 4 weeks post-plant. This is 6 weeks post-plant. You're going to get a lot of questions if you did try this. You don't really see soybeans from the road. It's a mat of what looks like spring wheat. You go out and spray it, your field turns brown, and 2 weeks later it turns and greens back up again. This is what it looks like, right at a week after spraying. We had to spray a little earlier than we would have typically. I'm trying to let that grow as long as possible. That oats did get to joint, but we had so much moisture that it wasn't something that I was really concerned about getting out and spraying, but the timing was right, hot, humid, sunny days to get Liberty on. So you kind of got to go when the timing is right. I ought to let it grow a little bit longer, but we kind of are getting the effects that we want. The 3 timings that I'm looking for to spray it out is if that oats joints, if we get the soybeans to flower, or if you've got dense mats of weeds. If you've got a weed here or there, that's going to be very common. It's not going to be this picture perfect, clean soybean field that you're used to from using pre's and spraying twice or 3 times in crop. You're going to have a weed here or there. You're going to have spots in your field that you would, in another field, you would not accept, but you're just going to have to live with that a little bit. You're going to feel sick because you drive a bunch of other fields. You come look at this one, it's totally different. And like I said, I work as an agronomist. Most of the guys I work with, conventional farmers. I ride their fields all day, and then I go look at mine. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? But I know what the end goal is. It's just, you got to change your mindset a little bit. I look at weeds now as more of a signaler of something wrong than always a negative. I got to keep them controlled because they will take care of yield for you. If you got a bunch of weeds, you're not going to have any crop. But you can use those as little signals and what you maybe need to do to address that soil going forward. Just a couple pictures we've seen from our experience is on the left side. Down below is actually a guy that farms southwest of Fargo, and he tried it all planted together with a box drill, just blended the seed together and planted it. And where there's a check strip is in the middle there. And that, you can see IDC pretty prevalent. On the outside, it's the oats, rye, flax, planted with soybeans, all in the same row. I don't necessarily recommend doing that because I think you can get too much competition in the row with the soybean. I think having it segregated is really the best way to do it. Tighter the rows. I like that 7.5 inch over 10, but either would work. But he saw great success. There wasn't a yield difference. We can obviously see a plant health difference. You can see vegetative growth difference. All those things are pumping carbon into the ground. Over time, that should lead to more nutrient release, healthier soils, better aggregates, and higher crop production. A lot of soil health practices, year 1, you don't see a thing. Year 2, maybe a little. Year 3, year 4, year 5, that is when the growth starts to happen. And then I think you can find a way to, it's just very slow at first and then it's exponential. You know, the biology really explodes. Here we ended up harvesting both of these fields. For our neighbor fell behind, you know, we're a small farm, but we're able to help these guys out so we don't have to cover as many acres so we can help our neighbors out every once in a while. This ended up being a 30 bushel an acre difference in soybeans across the fence line. So in 23 was our most successful year ever growing soybeans or corn for that matter. We had a farm average of 70 bushel soybeans and our previous, our farm APH was 39 bushel. So, you know, we're growing double our production history and we were growing 18 to 30 bushel better than our neighbors across the fence line, section line, across the road, that sort of comparison. And we ended up harvesting about 500 acres for our neighbors. So we got to see it through, you know, I was the one taking it to the elevator, seeing the scale tickets and stuff too. So it's not just hearsay. Typically what we're seeing a lot of times isn't a yield effect though. I'm looking for other markers of success. Yield a lot of times, and even as we look at these fields later today, I don't suspect there'll be a ton of difference in yield. Maybe one could win by a bushel or two, but you're not talking a statistical enough difference to say that one practice is better than the other. What I'm looking for are some of these things that are non-yield observations. We see bigger roots, stronger roots, way more nodulation. We see that first node set higher because we've got that early season competition. It makes those beans elongate up, and then as you strip that competition away, they branch. I haven't really done any soil temperature stuff for a while, but for the first couple years I was measuring where the first 2 years were the only years we didn't plant every acre this way. And it's because I didn't really know how to order the cover crop seed right yet. I was always running a few acres short. So what we saw was a 4 to 6 degree temperature difference where we had soybeans planted on themselves or with the intercrop mix. The kochia was a huge problem for us. Everybody knows rye suppresses kochia. It's giving you more benefits than that by putting carbon in the ground and stuff too, but that was really what I wanted. We're seeing small changes in soil structure, getting more earthworms. You're getting some aggregation in that top inch or two. We've still got a long way to go because we've been primarily corn and bean rotation. But it's little things, trying to reduce the negative effects that we have with planting soybeans, sunflowers, peas, anything of that nature, where we're crushing soil structure by fixing nitrogen. You know, nitrogen can't be in the presence of oxygen, so we're crushing pore space as we grow these small-seeded broadleaves and sunflowers, things of that nature. The cash crop is a more efficient water user. We've been able to infiltrate more water is the biggest portion of that, and you know, if you've got more water in the soil, you're not burning off as much, you're not drowning as much. We've seen higher Brix readings. This year was probably our most successful in terms of the Brix readings. We had spring wheat in the 10 to 12 range pretty consistently, and we had our soybeans were in the high single digits, 8, 9s a lot of times this year. So we're working towards a better, healthier plant. We still got a lot of work to do, but these are just little things that you can mark as progress, I think. That if you just rely on the yield monitor at the end of the year, you'd probably be disappointed. But if you can if you can find other things that mark success for you, you'll be more inclined to try it again. But obviously having higher yields drives revenue, but our most effective, revenue driver has been our reduction in fertilizer. We've been able to drop 40% in nitrogen and 75% in phosphorus, and those are pretty conservative numbers. I still come from conventional agriculture, so I do have a hard time dropping it all out completely, but stair-stepping it down manageably, whatever you're comfortable with, I think is the best way to do it. We started by just for corn, for example, taking a half pound of nitrogen away. We've done this this is year 11 doing that, and that's how we've gotten to this 40% reduction. Introducing the intercropping has really driven this phosphorus release that we're seeing. And I'll go into it as we dive into some soil samples, but we see that with P, K, we're seeing a lot more H3AK, more plant available calcium, micronutrients as we tissue test. We see all these, we don't really see deficiencies in our plants. We maybe see some imbalances is the things that we're trying to address now, but we're able to get a lot more nutrition into the plant by having that diverse set of roots. That microbiome that each seed brings is, depending on who you listen to, it's roughly 9 billion microbes per seed. So if I'm bringing 3 more species to my soybean crop, I'm at 36 billion versus 9. So I battle with this all the time. I'm a salesman. I have to sell you product. But the problem that I have is the biological, the bug in a jug. You're never going to be as efficient as a plant. So I'd rather sell you the plants to fix your problems than the biological to fix your problem. There can be a world where they blend together, but I'd always rather you start with plants. Then you can fix with nutrients and whatever, but I'd rather start with plants. Doesn't mean I'm a great salesman, but that's what I believe. I stole this from BW Fusion, just talking about the efficiency of what's going into the plant. When we're soil applying fertilizer, it's still the best way to do it, but there's a ton of waste in that process. And even bigger than the waste might be the salt that you bring with it. So when I say we're trying to reduce the amount of negative effects, that 75% reduction in total pounds of P, that's also a 75% reduction in the amount of salt I bring to the field. Same with the nitrogen, same with potash, it's potassium chloride. It's 40% chloride, so it's 40% salt. We're bringing a lot of salt to the field whenever we're fertilizing. That doesn't mean you can't fertilize or shouldn't fertilize, but there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate that problem. I don't know about you. In our area, salt has become a huge problem. We pond really bad. We're a prairie pothole. So you got old buffalo wallows. We've got very, 6, 8 inches down, you run into clay pretty much everywhere in our county. So we hold water really bad. We pond. That leads to salt. Compaction, lack of rotations, all these things are hurting our soil in terms of being able to take on water. And then we pond, it evaporates, we got salt spots. You go up and down Highway 281 in that Aberdeen area, it's horrific. I mean, it's whole fields that are, you've lost 30, 40% production because of salt. What do people do? Well, we plant corn and beans and we spray every inch and we fertilize every inch, and we wonder why the salt doesn't go away. It's like, it's very counterproductive, but we're incentivized to do that through crop insurance. So what I want to get to is get a little bit of the understanding of how inefficient our fertilizer is. I think you can be way more efficient through targeted foliar applications, through using stabilizers, through using plants. All these things the negative effect is much less, and that's really what I'm trying to work towards. It's just less negatives. So I just use a little bit of this is very simplified, but if you apply 450 pounds, you're trying to raise 200 bushel corn. If I'm generous, you're getting 50% efficiency out of that. That's 225 pounds per acre of plant food. And if you're a 30,000 population, that's 0.0075 pounds per plant. My question is, how much does the fertilizer that we apply really affect what gets into the plant? At 7,000ths of a pound per plant, I think there's a lot more going on than what we're doing. Now, I say that, And if you went and took all your nitrogen or sulfur away, you would see a visual negative effect. And you would see an actual negative effect when it came to yield. We've got a diseased system. We work in a broken medium in the soils that we're working with right now. So you can't strip it all away instantly. It's like ripping a needle out of a heroin addict's arm. They're probably going to die. Your soil systems are very addicted to all the inputs that we have. Mine too. And that's where this stair-step approach, whatever you're comfortable with, start gradually weaning off until you get to a point where you're not sacrificing yield, but you've reached maximum efficiency. I don't think you'll ever get to no fertilizer, maybe a little bit different than what Minokan Farms is doing, but I think you can be significantly less. And as an example, in 23, we had farm average 204 bushel corn, and we did that on 205 pounds of applied nutrients. That's NPK, sulfur, zinc. So that's plenty of rainfall, Mother Nature working with you correctly, but it's the way we apply. We're split applying the nitrogen, we're using foliars, we're treating the phosphorus that we do apply, and it's all very, very little pounds. But it can be done. It's just you've got to do what's comfortable to you, and don't do that year one. That took us 9 years to get to the point where we were comfortable to be as low as we were. And you, like I said, you just have to feel confident what you're doing, do your own research, really learn how to read a soil test. Again, I'm a salesman. Do not trust the guy selling you fertilizer on how much fertilizer you should put on. That's really poor decision making. He only wants to sell you fertilizer because it makes him money. We've started doing a lot more Haney tests on our farm. This is from 23. So on a Haney, you're looking at it's a better measurement of your plant available nutrients. So we're looking at phosphate, potassium, magnesium, calcium. You've got nitrogen measurements here. But really what I want to look at, in our polycrop beans, which is where we've got our intercrop mix, we've got a higher WEOC score, which is your water extractable organic carbon. That's what really drives the system. Those really exchangeable carbons, that simple carbon that the plant exudes from its roots, that's what's really driving your biological activity. That we saw a higher level of carbon in the soil after a soybean crop than after a corn crop. That is not 100% of the time we see that. 2 times in the 6 years we've seen that. So I'm not saying that's super common, but we have seen this where we're getting more carbon in the ground after soybeans than after corn. That is very atypical, but it speaks to what we're doing with the intercropping. With this soil test, so not only are we getting more carbon in the ground, we've got that CO2 burst is just a very basic measurement of the life in the soil. So they just take a soil sample, basically set it on fire, capture the carbon that comes off it. The higher CO2 burst number, the higher density of biology is in that soil. So we're seeing about a 15-20% increase in soybeans where we had a diverse mix, and relatively diverse, I should say, compared to a monocrop corn. Over time, these things stack on top of each other. It's consistently making decisions that progress you forward instead of keeping you stagnant or going backwards. Over time, that's where I think you get to that exponential growth eventually. It's a long-term thing. You're not talking this year or next year. You're talking 3, 5, 7 years down the road. But that's what I'm trying to work towards. On this test here, where you see this H3A phosphorus, we've got 18 parts per million. In the orthophosphate, which would be your P2O5, that orthophosphate, we got 11.7 parts per million. On the next 2 tests here is actually a measurement throughout the year. So we took that field that we had, it was following a corn crop, we had 11 parts per million orthophosphate, which roughly equates to 22 pounds of phosphorus. That was taken in the fall of 23. We took this test in June of 24. We had increased available phos from 22 pounds to 28 pounds. And then we took this test again in the fall, November of 24, without applying phosphorus, any fertilizer, by intercropping, and we raised 51 bushel soybeans on this quarter. We went from 22 pounds to 55 pounds of available phosphorus in one season. And that's an H3A extraction, so that's the best representation that we've got. We see similar things happen in the potassium in season to late season, but from year to year they're about the same. But the plant food calcium increases almost 2x. We go from about 450 parts per million in the fall of 23 to over 900 parts per million in the fall of 24. No applied fertilizer. All we did was intercrop, and we experimented, not even the full field, with a product called Meltdown from BW Fusion. It's a residue cycler. I don't know what I think about them, but I sell it, so it's a good product. You want some? I can get you some. But that's, again, I'm a really big believer in testing. Soil samples, tissue samples, all those things. They're not the end-all, be-all, but they're a great way to work your way towards your goal. Am I making positive improvements, or am I staying the same, going backwards? We've still got lots of things to fix. We've got low carbon levels here on this field, that's always a problem. You know, with a corn and bean rotation, what we're really trying to do is just offset the negatives of that soybean. It wasn't the best crop we've ever raised, and that's where we saw that huge difference in the carbon in the beans to the corn was the best crop we've ever raised. So it's not there's no straight line pass through that every time you do this you're going to see this exact result, but this is over 5 years of doing this on our entire farm to where we saw these sort of significant releases in nutrients. And then this is what everyone cares about. It's all about yield, right? So I'm just comparing ourselves against the county, and you know, like in 23 we helped harvest quite a few acres for some neighbors, but our APH before we started intercropping was 39 bushel. Our APH in the last 5 years since we've started intercropping is 52 bushel. That's on 2,400 acres. We're half corn, half beans. We've been wet a couple of these years, really wet, and so we've actually, more acres went beans because you can't get corn in, so you just switch your plan and put more beans in. That's how we got to so many acres of beans. But on average, we're seeing about a 9 bushel advantage over the county while using less inputs. We're not fertilizing our beans, never have. Maybe we'll do some foliar fertilizer. This year we did. But a lot of times we're doing this on no fertilizer input. That 70 bushel farm average, 0 fertilizer applied, 0 foliar applied. No fungicides, no insecticides. We don't have those problems a lot of times. We're not in white mold areas. Our biggest bug problem would probably be grasshoppers. And I guess I kind of didn't touch on it, but that cover crop mix costs $13 an acre. So you're putting 31 pounds out there. It's oats, rye, and flax. It costs $13 an acre. If you compare that to your chemical program, what are you spending on your spring pre? You're probably spending 15, 20, 25 bucks an acre. Look at that as your spring pre dollar. You're going to do your fall pre, which is sulfentrazone or Valor. That's like $4 or $5. If you got your own sprayer, if you got to pay someone, it's 15 bucks an acre. If you're doing it yourself, you probably should charge yourself the same, but it's cheaper. But the savings come from, okay, so we're going to spend $10 less an acre in our spring chemical. Our chemical, though, happens to be plants. We're going to use that to get us through the first 2 months of growth. That's the goal, 8 weeks. And then you're going to spray again at that time. Ideally pre-flower in soybeans. And then a lot of times, I would say about 40% of the time, we're spraying our beans once. This year we had to end up spraying our beans twice, and we used clethodim and 16 ounces of Roundup. We used 8 ounces of clethodim, 16 ounces of Roundup. That was our entire second pass. So we're able to reduce a ton of dollars in chemical spend because we have so much less weed competition. Small acres means we can time our sprays really well. That also helps with chemical reduction. But all these things working together, it's not, don't use any of the tools that we have in conventional agriculture. It's use less of them, more timely, more strategically. That's what I try to work with my growers to get to. Our biggest lessons have been, we've done a really poor job with rotations. We've been primarily corn and bean farmers for the last 20 years. We were looking at fields this morning with Jay, and I told him it took us until we did all wheat and beans this year on our farm. And it took us until 2003 to get to our last 10 wheat crops. So that's how poor we've been with rotations, chasing the dollar. But that really hurt us. Last year where we had beans on corn stalks, versus where we did beans on beans, we had a 12 bushel advantage in rotated ground. That's something that we're just going to be better about. Yeah, getting small grains in sucks. A third of our acres aren't going to make us any money, but we're losing it in terms of production. I think we've kind of plateaued. We've got to continue to kind of push this soil health deal. If I'm going to come talk to you guys, I should walk it too. That's kind of the way I feel. So another thing that I'm big into pushing bean planting earlier and earlier and earlier. This year it bit us. We got frost in May, 2 nights in a row, knocked out about half our stand. So we ended up replanting all of our beans this year. The reason I'm planting beans earlier is, one, I've got this cover crop mix with me. I want that competing before any of my other stuff starts competing. 2, if you get a bean planted earlier, you change the hormone balance in that plant. You get a more cytokine dominant plant, which means shorter internodal length and more branching. That's what I'm trying to drive with bean production. I don't want this big, tall, beautiful, bushy bean. I want this squatty, branchy bean, and that's giving you more flower sets. The closer you can set those nodes together, the more potential for flower sets, more yield. Potential. Mother Nature's got to work with you. All that has to, you got to catch some breaks, obviously, but that's what we're trying to set ourselves up for, is potential. If it rains in August, I got a lot of potential. The bigger returns on crop production, it's not that we're necessarily raising more bushels, we're just spending less to raise those bushels. And we're business people first and foremost. We're farmers by trade, but we're running businesses, and ROI is really what I'm after. I don't really care about yield. If I can make money at 170 bushel, that's what I'm happy with that. But I don't want to sacrifice yield by any means, but you find that breaking point where, that last 20 bushels is the most expensive to raise. That's where you've got to over-apply fertility to get that last 20% or 20 bushel. Same with chemistry. That last 10% of weed control is the most expensive weed control. It's an extra pass through the field, or it's more things in the tank, versus if you can live with a weed here or there in your field. I'm fine with that personally. And, everybody's standard's a little bit different, but that's something that you've got to figure out for yourself what you're comfortable with. Testing. I'm a big believer in testing. I'll say it again. Haney's, tissue samples, sap samples, I have not played around with. But there's a lot of things out there. If you budgeted $1 an acre for your farm, you could test 5 times a year. It's very inexpensive, and it's just a way to see, what am I doing anything that's making a difference? There is very little correlation to parts per million on a soil test and what actually gets in your plant. I'm a big believer in tissue samples. They kind of guide me more now than soil samples do, because at the end of the day, it only matters what I get into my plant. So a tissue is a much better representation of that than what a soil sample is saying. Like I said, we're trying to move things forward a little bit. I always say that we're planting the weeds we know we can control with our cover crop. But like I said, we added a few things this year: millet, safflower, sugar beets. The sugar beet is to try and control water hemp. They're in the same plant family. Sugar beet grows earlier in the season, and we did see really good sugar beet growth, and we didn't have a lot of water hemp this year. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I'd like to believe there is. I do think that we've just had really good weed control over a long period of time too. That helps. Plus, narrow row soybeans, canopy's our best weed control, so the quicker we can get there. And for us, we're at canopy about 6 weeks into growth. Then there's about a 2-week period where we're not at canopy anymore, and then we reach it again. So there's a very short window in our soybean production where we don't have canopy in the season. So that's another benefit from the intercrop mix. The millet was for, it's a warm season grass. I was trying to control green and yellow foxtail. That stuff starts way earlier than the millet will. I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but that's something I'm still tweaking. Safflower was kind of the same thing. It's the same plant family as Canadian thistle. Safflower's warm season, I've learned after the fact. Didn't do enough research before I experimented, but you live and you learn. So that didn't control our thistle like I was hoping. And they didn't really grow at all. The sugar beet was the only one that we added into our mix that grew. This year, we added intercrop mix to our wheat. The clover didn't grow, but the flax and the peas grew really, really well. You could find that anywhere. And we treated it just the same. Whenever you're going out with herbicide timing on your spring wheat, we just sprayed it out. We used a little bit of Broxam and 2,4-D and took this out, no problem. So this year, on that field where I showed that increase in phosphorus availability, our yield goal is 80 bushel spring wheat. We hit 72, but we did on 0 applied pounds of phosphorus. No foliar, no starter fertilizer. We timed foliar applications with nitrogen, with sulfur, with amino acids, with potassium, but no applied phosphorus. With that, it was 15.7 protein, 62 pounds. So it had quality plus yield. The rest of our wheat, I don't know, it's had 4 inches on it the last 3 days. Don't feel really good about that, but it is what it is. But that testing, just by testing, we learned that we could save $40 an acre in our wheat production. That's a lot of dollars. That's a lot of value just by taking a $100 soil sample. The other thing that I'll just leave you guys with, these are some things that really got the ball rolling for me. The Carbonomics video by Keith Burns, I think might be the best thing in regenerative agriculture. That's an hour long. It's super quick, super to the point, and he speaks in a language everyone can understand. If you want to really get down into the nitty gritty, listen to Christine Jones or John Kempf. You'll forget more than you learn, but those are great resources as well. Also been messing around a lot with that Field Lark AI that Advancing EcoAg just came out with. That's a fantastic tool. John Kempf has his own AI too on Delphi. That's a fantastic resource. You can spend many nights just asking questions to a computer and getting a lot more targeted results than Google or the other AIs that are out there. So with that, I guess if anybody has any questions, feel free to fire away and let me know. I'll be around all day, so you can come up to me then too.
We've got some time for some questions if anyone's got any questions.
Do you raise your own cover crop stuff, or do you
No, we buy it.
Repeat the question if you would.
Yeah, he asked if we raise our own cover crop seed. We don't, we just buy it. I've worked with a guy out of Clear Lake who I'm working on becoming a supplier. I want to start raising the things that I sell in this cover crop mix. So we're trying to build a partnership, build that customer base up a little bit enough to where I can make my own market for these different grains and sell them to him. That's kind of our goal in the next 3 to 5 years, is build enough acres, especially in South Dakota. If you go back to 23, we were the only people in South Dakota doing it. As we sit today, there's a little under 9,000 acres of this practice in South Dakota that I know of personally. I know of a little bit more. There's guys in North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska all doing this practice as well. Each one tweaking it to themselves a little bit. The further east you go, a lot less air seeders, a lot less drills. So there were guys that were willing to make 2 passes with a corn planter and like a small grain disc and to do it. But yeah, we're getting some traction in terms of other people trying it. No one close to me really, outside of one guy. Everybody else is 100 miles away, but that seems to be how it works. Yeah.
What's the most interesting thing you've learned from Ag AI?
Oh boy. Well, he asked what's the most interesting thing I've learned from Ag AI. What I've been really questioning a lot is this chemical side of things. What chemicals have the most negative effects on the soil biology? And it came back with Roundup, 2,4-D, dicamba. So in next year, we're going to try and raise all of our crops without any of it. So that's, who knows? We still do a lot of soil applied. I should rephrase that a little bit. I asked burn down chemicals. I did not talk soil applied chemicals. That's still a very important tool for us. I think it's probably the most effective tool we've got, especially fall applied pre's. I'm a huge fan, and they're so cheap. But anything systemic that you spray is going to have more negative effects on the soil biology. If it's a contact-only killer, Liberty, your Broxam, your Clethodim, those are non-systemic herbicides. You're going to have good, maybe less effects. They're also less researched too. So, Roundup's kind of the devil we know, I think, a little bit. So some of these other things might be just as negative, but I'm going to try and get away from the Roundup, the 2,4-D, the dicamba, those chemistries. Yes?
He made comment about your carbon level going up after your soybeans. Is that based on a total nutrient digestion test, or is that your WEOC?
That was WEOC carbon. So that's that really simple carbon that really drives the bacterial side of things. Your organic matter is what your larger organisms are really living off of. That WEOC really seems to drive that in-season biology.
Are you biofarming seed?
No, we're not using it. I guess we're using inoculant on soybeans. Oh yeah, he asked if we're bio-inoculating the seed. We're not. I use very little biological products. I am just not a believer in a bug in a jug. I am a big believer in foliar fertilizer because I think you get that biological aspect out of it, because I'm going to green up that plant. That means it's going to photosynthesize more. If it's photosynthesizing more, I get more carbon dump out of the roots. If I get more carbon dump out of the roots, I feed more biology. The biology then in turns feed me nutrients. So I'm a big believer in targeted foliar applications, and not just nitrogen or sulfur. Things like calcium, boron, moly, all these things can really help the effectiveness of those NPK nutrients in the plant. So I look at, that NPK is less than 8% of a plant at harvest. The things that I'm trying to drive are the free things. I want the carbon, I want the hydrogen, I want the sunlight, I want the water. That's 90% of your plant at harvest. So we're worried about the 10% and not the 90%. I think we're a little bit messed up on that, just in agriculture in general. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, you said that was it the safflower millet did grow?
Yeah.
Did you ever look, was there any residual from years prior that might have affected that?
That could have. I did not look into that.
Because maybe it just wasn't the environment.
It could.
Something.
We also planted really early. We were planted April 15th this year. And so for us, that's 10 days before our early plant date. It bit us really bad because we caught 2 nights of frost in May. We were unifoliate or first trifoliate on the beans that were up, and we lost half our stand. Had to go reseed it. Safflower and millet, like warmer temperature soil, I think that has more to do with it than anything, but that's a definite possibility.
Nothing at all grew.
Yeah, never saw it. Even later this year, when I had some foxtail or my volunteer corn finally came, none of the safflower, none of the millet. So I was very surprised to see that none of it grew. And we're planting our beans a little bit deeper than we are our cover crop seed, because I want that cover crop seed to get up and grow. Trying to get the beans in between 1.5 inches and 2 inches. Again, that can change that hormone balance, make it more cytokinin dominant. And then that cover crop, we're trying to get it 3/4 inch to 1 inch in the ground. With an air seeder, that means you set it 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deeper, because you just ride over residue, you bounce over the corn stalks. The other thing too is we're planting our beans at 150,000 population, shooting for 100,000 live. An air seeder is a controlled spill, so you lose a ton of seed. It's super wasteful. That's another negative compared to a corn planter. With every row shut off, you can be a lot more efficient that way, but you have to overseed a little bit to get enough plants in the ground to have a good stand. That's something that we fight a lot, is our residue, getting that to cycle fast enough. Part of it is not having good enough rotations, not having that small grain crop in the mix. So hopefully with that, we get a little bit better residue management, also trying to get cattle incorporated or a hoof of some sort incorporated. Yeah.
Done any nutrient tests?
Nutrient tests.
Like the food quality, that's a big topic
Nope.
now on nutrient thing.
Who's paying you for it? Nope, I'm not going to invest money until there's a market, I guess. I think there's absolutely a future for that. If you're talking like oats and wheat, they're doing those tests a lot of times anyways too. You know, if it's going to milling quality stuff. I think that'd be great. I just don't know that outside of tissue sampling, I can see that I've got a higher protein percentage than some other stuff that I tissue sample, or total mineral content, that sort of things. I can see those, but I'm not doing anything on the grain side.
No point looking unless you get paid.
That's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, it's a great idea, but someone's got to break out the checkbook. Yes?
What's your opinion of rolling the soybeans? We have some ground we'd have to roll, or we can't grow soybeans. But
Rock rolling?
work with the cover crop.
Yeah, rock rolling. So we always rock roll too. We got plenty of rock in our farm. We wait until the soybeans are pop can tall. Again, I'm trying to influence cytokinin in that plant. Also, I don't blow any dirt if I let those beans get, you know, it's usually V2, V3, we're rock rolling, and our cover crop is still growing. So it's a completely green field, and you go out there and roll it, and you think, what the hell am I doing? And you come back a day later, and you can't even find your tracks. So it's not gonna hurt the beans. You wanna pick a nice, sunny, warm day, so those beans are nice and rubbery, but you won't have any issues rolling them if they're up, if that's kind of what you were asking. Yep. Yeah.
So we were really excited, excuse me, to have Alex here. I think this is what I would call rethinking cover crops. Because cover crops have been kind of the rented mule, you know? We can, yeah. Yes, Dennis? Yep. Okay, so rethinking cover crops. So when I saw some of Alex's efforts, I got pretty excited about it. Because he's rethinking cover crops for the northern plains. You know, we're not a southern state, right? We're in the north end, and we're on the far north end. And we know how shorter season is, and it'd be similar to Falkton, South Dakota.
Yep.
Maybe just a little different. But you're looking at a scenario when you think about rethinking cover crops, you can bring biodiversity back into a corn bean rotation. My goodness.
And that's
How
something.
many things can you fix by bringing in additional plant diversity? So we know this and we observe this, but now you have somebody who's done this for, what is it, 5?
This is our 6th year.
6th year. So if a farmer's doing, even if he's South Dakota, don't hold that, not gonna hold nothing against him, but you're looking at somebody that's doing this for 6 years, a farmer doing it for 6 years.
And on every acre too.
Yeah, yeah. So not a plot.
No,
right? Not a plot.
every acre we farmed for the last 6 years.
Farm. Well, then the first thing I did is I took this without your permission.
Yeah.
And I sent it to the NRCS state conservationists, and I said, I think this is one way that we could look at cover crop standard in the future for 340, which is jargon speak for NRCS. And so how do we bring that cover crop effort into the northern plains? Normally, we were thinking about things like planting green or maybe fall. Okay, all fine and good, but Alex puts it with the crop. And so there's so many benefits to that because of the biodiversity aspects that he explained. So super excited about that. I think we can do something with this. I really do. I think we need to get behind it and support it. But I think it offers so much, offers a lot of opportunity. And I don't know if you noticed our erosion rates in North Dakota. If you look at the dial, you know, like 1 through 10, well, it's past that. I think there's another rating, it said god awful. And I think that's kind of where we're at times. And then we green up, and we get canopy, and then we kind of forget about it. And then we go back through it again after that. And we get erosion again, then finally we green up, we kind of forget about it. And so we got to stabilize. If we're going to build these carbon levels, we're going to bring this stability to these soils. I think what Alex is doing is going to give us another tool in the toolbox. And I think there's a lot of potential for it. So that's just old man thinking, but I think there's a lot to it. And so I told Alex this morning, I said, when I looked at what you were doing, it was intuitively, it's like putting a pocket on a shirt. You know that's a good thing, right? And so, very useful. And so you're looking at a pretty good situation there, so I hope you all get a chance to visit more of Alex. So, appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. When you brought up the NRCS, that's something I should have mentioned. We used this practice, and it counted in the CSP program in South Dakota for a cover crop election. So we were also getting paid on it. That helped drive the decision a little bit. But when we signed up for the CSP program, we said we were going to plant 200 acres of cover crop every year. And if you're talking about conservation, and the NRCS identifies a cover crop as something that's planted after a cash crop, and there's all these limitations to it. There's a lot of hurdles there to get the government to understand what I'm doing. It took a lot of effort with them and with our crop insurance. But once I got that through what we were actually doing, you want to talk about conservation. We're planting something when I know I'm going to get growth in the spring. Less time, less field disturbance, less fuel burned, and I'm getting 8 weeks of growth, where if I planted a cover crop, even if it was the day I harvested wheat, I would maybe get 6 weeks of growth before our first frost. So I'm planting crops when I know they're actually going to grow. That's a huge benefit. And then I've seen the CSP program just abused, where guys would go out after the last frost, after the first frost, they'd intentionally plant stuff they knew wasn't going to grow to collect a check from the government. And there's been a lot of cover crops have a little bit of a negative connotation in our area because they'd go out and plant turnips and radishes and call it a cover crop. Well, and they'd wonder why their crop suffered the year after. There wasn't enough diversity. We're robbing carbon from the system. So there's a lot of, cover crops don't have to have a ton of species in them. I think you eventually build to that. But it's about just getting something growing. You can do something very simple after a spring wheat crop that's millet, sorghum, oats, call that good. Just pump more carbon into that system, keep that thing turning. You don't have to have an 8-way, 10-way mix. You can do 3 or 4 things, find out what grows on your ground, what you're willing to manage, adapt it to yourself. But I do think that this practice can fit any of your acres. If you're growing soybeans and you got an air seeder, those are the only 2 hurdles to try this program. And I would never guarantee anything, but I don't think you're ever going to sacrifice yield, but you might increase fertility availability, you might reduce weed pressure, you might increase yield too. So what you're doing now is obviously working, you're all in business, but there's ways we can be better. Yes? I don't have cattle. He asked if I tried polycropping in corn. I don't have cattle, so I work with a neighbor of mine. He's tried intercropping in corn and stuff. With cattle integration, it's a home run. For us, it would just be giving up yield. So I think a hoof, whether it's a sheep, cow, goat, whatever, then there's a ton of benefits to it. For us, it doesn't make any sense. Plus, we're 20-inch corn. And I just don't think you'd get anything to grow in a 20-inch corn row. So, anything else? All right, thank you.